Hello everyone, welcome back. And today's video, we got a couple of things to discuss, including a couple of signings, a couple of PTO updates, update regarding Marc Andre Fleury's future playing career, and some trade rumors involving the Winnipeg Jets, the Buffalo Sabres, and the Calgary Flames. We'll go to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now, as usual, I'm going to kick things off today by discussing a couple of signings that have happened over the past couple of days. There were 3 ELCs, not too many, but a decent amount, and there was one big one. And the big one was that the Winnipeg Jets have signed to an ELC, their first round pick in the 2023 draft, Colby Barlow. The left winger gets a 3-year ELC with an AAV of $950,000. And the deal should start at the beginning of this year. Now, Barlow is a fantastic player, played over in the OHL last year, put up 46 goals and 79 points in 59 games. He looked fantastic last year in the OHL, playing with the Owen Sound attack. He's been a fantastic player in the OHL for the past number of years. Barlow, I think, is probably going to go back to the OHL this year, probably going to continue to develop a little bit over in the OHL, but after next year, I think there's a very likely chance he could make the NHL roster. If not next year, then he spends a year in the AHL, and in 2 years' time, he's going to definitely be an NHL forward. So I don't expect Barlow to take too long to make it to the NHL roster, but I do think he probably will spend the next year in the OHL. So good to see he got his ELC signed, but I think in the next year or two, Barlow should definitely be challenging for a playoff spot. Very good left winger. He should be a good middle six forward, power forward. He has a lot of good leadership qualities that a lot of people think could make him one of the future captains of the Winnipeg Jets. He has a really good shot. He's a very good goal scorer. I think in the long term, he could be a fantastic fit for the Winnipeg Jets. So good to see them sign him to his ELC, and hopefully in the next year or two, Barlow can challenge for an NHL roster spot. Going over to the Calgary Flames, they also signed an ELC in the last couple of days, signing left winger Parker Bell, who was a 5th round pick in the 2022 draft, to a 3-year ELC with an AAV of $858,000, and the deal will begin most likely this year. Now, Bell has been playing over in the WHL with the Tri-City Americans the past couple of years, put up 25 goals and 64 points in 55 WHL games last year. A little bit more of an improvement from his previous year. He looks like a pretty decent player. I think long term he should be able to be a solid middle six player, maybe playing on the third pair. So I think Bell has a really good chance of being a solid NHLer for the Flames. Probably going to go either back to the WHL or to the AHL this year. Probably going to need still a year or two more in development in either the WHL or the AHL. But in a year or two time, I do think Bell could challenge for a solid roster spot with the Calgary Flames. I think he has a future of being a solid NHL forward. For a 5th rounder, he looks really good. And I think in time, Bell could definitely be a solid pick for the Calgary Flames. So, solid deal there. I think that's a really good ELC. I think Bell has a future as an NHL left winger on like a third line for the Flames. And I think Bell definitely deserves that ELC. So good to see that Parker Bell gets his new contract for the Calgary Flames. And the one bigger surprising ELC that's happened over the past couple of days was that the Ottawa Senators has signed right shot defenseman Turri to an ELC. The unsigned, undrafted prospects signed a 3-year, $805,000 ELC with the Ottawa Senators to remain a member of the Senators. That was a fantastic deal in my opinion. He actually came to the prospects tournament, I think, on an amateur tryout. The Sens really did like what they signed. They invited him to training camp, and now they've even signed him to an entry-level contract. So good to see Turri make such an impact on the Senators that he was able to get his ELC. He's a very, very good right-shot defenseman. He's got a lot of size on him. He's a really big right-shot defenseman. Played last year with Sudbury of the OHL, putting up 5 goals, 16 points in 57 games. So the undrafted forward gets an ELC. That's good news for him. I think Ottawa really likes this player, and I think in time, maybe Turri, after a couple of years more developing, maybe 1 or 2 more years, I think there's a chance Turri could challenge for like a third pair role on the Sens bottom pairing. So going to be interesting to see, but that was a surprising one. I didn't think many people thought that Turri would get the ELC so quickly. But yeah, really good showing at the rookie camp. He had a really good early part of training camp, and now he's signed to his ELC. So good to see him get his ELC, and the Senators must really like him if they're willing to give him an ELC after only a couple of weeks with the team. So good to see him get an ELC, and hopefully he has a big future with the Ottawa Senators. So that's all the signings we're going to get to here today. A big ELC signing for the Winnipeg Jets, Colby Barlow. A good signing there for the Flames for Parker Bell, and a surprising one, but a good one for Fleury in Ottawa. Going over to a couple of PTO updates. We have had a few PTO updates over the past couple of days. First, with the Calgary Flames, they have signed left shot defenseman Jonathan Espiriot. The Detroit Red Wings have signed forward Artem Anisimov, as well as goaltender Michael Hutchinson, and the New York Rangers have signed right shot defenseman Adam Clendening. So none of those ones are really overly significant adds on the PTOs. For Espiriot, he's been basically an AHL defender his entire career. I wouldn't expect too much different. He's not going to beat out guys like Tanev, Zadorov, and guys like those on the defensive end for Calgary. So at best, I think Calgary could sign him to a two-way deal, send him to the minors, and he could be a depth call-up option. I think that would be the best for Espiriot, but I don't expect him to probably make the NHL roster. So going to training camp on PTO with Calgary, really good for Espiriot, but I don't expect him to make the NHL roster. He could get a two-way deal, but I wouldn't expect him to make the NHL roster. Anisimov and Hutchinson are decent veterans. Anisimov went to training camp last year with the Flyers on a PTO, but only was able to play in the AHL. Detroit has a way more deeper group this year than Philadelphia did last year, so I would find it extremely hard once again for see Anisimov make the NHL roster. Once again, Detroit could get him on a two-way deal to send him to the minors and possibly be a call-up option, but I wouldn't be overly shocked if the Red Wings didn't sign him. So Anisimov goes to training camp on a PTO with the Wings. Good there, but I don't overly expect him to probably make an NHL roster. Possibly could get a two-way contract, but I don't expect him to. Over with Michael Hutchinson, he's been a really good third-string goaltender for the past couple of years for teams like the Golden Knights, the Leafs. But the Red Wings already have a good three goalies deep and really good with those three goalies. They have Husso, Reimer, and Lyon. So I would really be surprised if Hutchinson gets a contract from the Wings. I could see them possibly sign to be maybe like the fourth-string goaltender in Detroit, but I would be more likely to see if he has a really good training camp, a really good showing with Detroit. Maybe there's another team who has a little bit of a weaker goalie depth where you don't really have a solid backup or a solid third stringer that maybe signs him. But I'll be extremely shocked to see Hutchinson sign a contract with the Wings. And then with the Rangers, they got Adam Clendening. Once again, mostly an AHL forward over the past couple of years. Rangers have a fantastically deep defense right now, so sort of like Anisimov and Espiriot, way too deep, I think, to make the NHL roster. At the best scenario, he gets a two NHL contracts, placed on waivers, clears waivers, and goes to the minors. So that's all I think Clendening can do at this point. Good to see him going to training camp on PTO. That's definitely a very fantastic deal for him. But I don't expect Clendening to make the NHL roster. So going to be interesting to see, but Clendening I don't expect to make the NHL roster. Maybe he gets a two-way NHL contract sent to the minors. Same thing with Anisimov in Detroit. Same thing with Espiriot in Calgary. I'll be quite surprised if Hutchinson does get a deal with Detroit, given how deep their goaltending position is right now. But I could see him possibly get like a third-string option elsewhere. So we're going to have to wait and see, but those are your 4 PTO updates. Anisimov and Hutchinson go to training camp on a PTO with the Wings. Rangers get Clendening on a PTO, and Calgary Flames get Jonathan Espiriot on a PTO. And hopefully all 4 of these guys can show good, and maybe show that they could be worth maybe a 2-way NHL contract, even if they have to play it in the minors. So those are some really good PTOs that have happened recently. Just going over to a quick injury update here. There have been a couple of injury updates over the past couple of days. I wanted to just get some of these guys announced that they have injuries. Josh Norris is day-to-day with undisclosed injury. It sounds like it's not overly serious, but after missing the entirety of last year due to injuries, the Sens are being extremely careful with that. The Vancouver Canucks, as we expected, have placed Tucker Poolman on long-term injury reserve. He still has a head injury. He's still out for a long period of time. Most likely not going to play the entirety of the season, so didn't have any really surprises there. Matthias Ekholm for the Edmonton Oilers has an injury. He's day-to-day with that. He shouldn't be out for too long, but he's currently injured. The Toronto Maple Leafs confirmed that Jake Muzzin, due to injuries, is going to miss the entirety of the season. I don't think that's too surprising there. The Blue Jackets have found out that Neil Tarasov and Kirill Marchenko both have day-to-day injuries. Shouldn't be out overly long. Jake Bean and Matteo Olivier seem to still be injured right now and are out week to week. Hopefully they're not out too long so they don't miss the start of the season. The Colorado Avalanche also have a couple of guys who are day-to-day, including Andrew Cogliano, who did not play the final few games of the playoffs due to an injury. Cale Makar, who was banged up in the playoffs. Josh Manson, who was banged up in the playoffs. All three of those guys are currently day-to-day. They shouldn't be out overly long, but they're probably going to miss the next couple of days, as well as some of the Avalanche's prospects like Jason Pollan or Wyatt Amadot, also day-to-day right now. You've also got Max Willman, who's on a PTO in New Jersey. He's been cleared to play. Simon Benoit is out day-to-day with a back injury. Lucas Edmonds in Tampa is out day-to-day right now with a lower body injury. Hull and Blackwell are currently day-to-day with injuries for the Hawks, while Cole Gutman, who missed the last few games of the season for the Blackhawks in the regular season last year, has been cleared to play. Chris Weidman has a back injury for the Canadiens. He's going to be out indefinitely, so he's most likely going to miss the start of the season, and there's been a lot of talk he could miss even more time. Christian Dvorak, who we said could be out to start the season, is at least going to miss the first month of the season, so that's not too much of a surprise. Matt Murray, who we did say is probably going to go on long-term injury reserve, the team announced that he has to have surgery, and he's going to be out for months, so he's probably not going to be back for an extremely long period of time. The Tampa Bay Lightning have Tanner Jeannot and Eric Chernak, who missed the final few games of the season and were banged up in the playoffs. Both of those guys have been cleared to play. Mason McTavish, who's a really good young up-and-coming player for the Ducks, has an upper body injury, is out day-to-day. Vegas Golden Knights have a couple of prospects that are day-to-day in Lane Ahak and Daniel Miramanov. The San Jose Sharks have Logan Couture out with a lower body injury. He's out week to week. Hopefully he's not going to miss too much time or the start of the season. Penn's prospect Owen Pickering is day-to-day with an ankle injury. Bolts bottom 6'4" Logan Brown's day-to-day with an injury. Wild's top 6'4" Ryan Hartman is out with an upper body injury and he's out day-to-day. Andrei Burakovsky, who missed some significant time last year due to injuries, is now been cleared to play. Ryan McLeod is also day-to-day, just like Matthias Ekholm Edmonton, due to an injury. The Sharks also have Eetu Makiniemi, who's out with a hip injury. He's out day-to-day. Quinn Musty's out day-to-day for the San Jose Sharks. UC Parsons out day-to-day for the Nashville Predators. And Carter Verhaeghe's out day-to-day right now for the Florida Panthers. So a couple of small injuries there. None one's overly out for an overly long period of time, except for a couple of the guys who we already thought were most likely going to go on long-term injury reserve, plus guys like Dvorak and Weidman. So not overly abundance of huge injury updates. Also, Oliver Shillington did not pass his physical, so he is going to miss the first bit of training camp, so that's not really good for the Flames, but still. Torrey Krug's injured right now with the St. Louis Blues. So there's definitely a couple of injuries, but still, I don't think it's overly surprising that we're going to have a few bumps and bruises to get ready for training camp. And I expect most of these guys to probably get back in the not-too-distant future. So some really good injury updates there. I just want to go on a quick touch on Marc Andre Fleury. He announced recently that he's going to decide his playing career after this year. Fleury's in the final year of his deal with the Minnesota Wild. Minnesota's a fantastic goaltending time right now of Gustafsson and Fleury, but they have a really good young goaltender in Jesper Wallstedt who's coming up in the not-too-distant future, who's probably going to take the second spot from Fleury, so they're probably going to have next year a tandem with Gustafsson and Wallstedt as their two goaltenders. So it'll be interesting to see if Fleury winds up signing with another team as a free agent next year, or if he decides to call it quits after the season. It'll be really interesting to see, but it sounds like his decision will be coming at some point next year. Fleury's a really, really good goaltender. He's still, in my opinion, it could be a decent tandem goaltender, so if he was to try and play somewhere else, I think there would be some interest. I think there's going to be some teams next year who could definitely use a solid veteran tandem goaltender, so I would definitely think there would be interest in Fleury, especially given his pedigree. But at the same time, Fleury has played a long career. He's getting up there in age, and I do think it could be time for him to call it quits. There was a lot of speculation that he could call it quits before he signed his 2-year extension in Minnesota, but he did sign his 2-year extension in Minnesota. He's been playing there ever since, and I do think there's a possibility that now that he's played a couple more seasons with Minnesota, he could wind up calling it a career. So going to be interesting to see, but it sounds like Fleury will make his decision on his career after the season, and it's quite possible that he either decides to keep going, and he'll most likely go to free agency to someone else, or he'll call it a career, in which it was a really, really good long-term NHL career. So going to be interesting to see, but Fleury's decision will come later in the season, so don't expect Fleury to make any sort of decision on his playing career in the not-too-distant future. That will probably happen next offseason. But going over to a couple of trade rumors I want to discuss here today. First is the Winnipeg Jets. As we get into training camp, there's been a lot of media, a lot of players that have been meeting with media talking about some things. And one of the players who did talk to some media was Connor Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck did say that he'd be open to staying with the Winnipeg Jets, as we have heard in the past couple of days and weeks. Hellebuyck might be open to. He said he does really want to win a Stanley Cup, and that's probably his best goal, but he says he wants to win a cup with the team he thinks can win a cup. He says this team believes they can win a cup. So I think if the Jets show this year that they can still be a very competitive team, he'd be willing to sign a long-term extension with them. I think it's very, very possible. But I think the question is, can the Winnipeg Jets be a very competitive team this year? That's going to be the interesting thing. I think Winnipeg and Calgary, for a variety of different reasons, are in similar positions. Like, Hellebuyck and Scheifele in Winnipeg are sort of like Lindholm, Hanifin, and Backlund in Calgary. It sort of sounds like those guys are going to wait and see how the season plays out. If the Calgary Flames or Winnipeg Jets can make the playoffs, maybe not even as like a top-end team, but maybe if they just make the playoffs, are able to win a round or two, show that they're a really good team and they can grow, I think there would be interest from Lindholm, Hanifin, Backlund, Scheifele, or Hellebuyck to re-sign with the team. But if they have a mediocre season or a bad season, if they either miss the playoffs or they sneak into a wildcard spot, and then in the playoffs, they lose really quickly, like in 4 or 5, maybe even 6 games to a team who's a little bit better than them in a first-place position. I think there would be a lot of speculation that those guys would not see a huge, bright future with their team, given they would have another first-round exit. So I think it's quite possible Hellebuyck does resign. But I think, once again, just like with Lindholm, Hanifin, and Backlund in the Calgary organization, I'll probably have to wait until closer to the free agency. As I do think Hellebuyck could sign with the Jets. It does sound like it's likely, it's possible, but I do think Hellebuyck will only sign if the Jets have a solid season this year. And if the Jets have a mediocre or bad season this year, I think Hellebuyck will most likely still test free agency, which could lead him to be a solid trade candidate at the 2024 trade deadline. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Scheifele probably doing the same thing. Probably would like to stay with Winnipeg. This is the only team he's played for. Would probably be open to staying, but at the same time, he wants to win a Stanley Cup. So I definitely do expect him to also be wanting to go to wherever he feels he can win a cup best. So going interesting to see, but Hellebuyck, Scheifele sounds like could remain with Winnipeg even after all the season of speculation of them being traded, but it sounds like they'll have to wait until closer to the trade line or the end of the season to sign an extension, as they really want to figure out which direction the Winnipeg Jets team is heading at this point in time. Going over to the Buffalo Sabres, could they have some interest in unsigned RFA Trevor Zegras? There have been a couple of recent speculations from a couple of different sources saying that the Anaheim Ducks are way apart on RFA contracts with Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras. According to the TSN Insider Trading, as well as a couple of other reports I've seen, it sounds like they are far apart on signing these two young players to new NHL deals, which is really surprising given the fact that this Ducks team has over $60 million in cap space and has a ton of cap space to work with. So I'm quite surprised that Zegras and Drysdale have not been signed yet, but there's also been some other updates that I've seen. According to Renaud Lavoie, who was talking about this situation, he's hearing that Trevor Zegras is being offered $3 to $4 million by the Anaheim Ducks. Now that's pretty low, given the fact that there are some bottom 6 forwards in Chicago that are making $4 million, and Perry and Nick Foligno. And that is, according to what they're saying, what they're offering Anaheim right now. Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but if that's true, the Ducks are really lowballing Zegras. In my opinion, Zegras is at least a $6 million, if not $7 million player on a 3-year bridge deal, which is what a lot of people think that he will sign for. He probably will sign a bridge deal. Even on a bridge deal, I don't think he's worth $4 million. Zegras is a very fantastic player, very talented player. He's the face of the franchise in Anaheim. They should really be trying to sign him. Even if they have to overpay him a little bit in their eyes, he should at least get $6 million, if not $7 million. And I think they will eventually come to terms with an extension. But if they're offering him $3 or $4 million, that's got to hurt his psyche. I mean, he's a really fantastic player, and why is he getting squeezed when they paid Alex Killorn $6 million on a new deal? And when they have $16 million in cap space, I think they could easily sign Zegras to about $6 million at the very least, if not $7 million. They could sign Drysdale to $4 or $5 after the season he had, given the fact he was injured. At that point, you're spending about $10 to $12 million between those guys. You still have $6 to $4 million left in cap space for this upcoming season. So in my eyes, you could still do that, and you'd still be really cap compliant. But if you're lowballing Zegras at $3 or $4 million, I don't think he's ever going to sign somewhere close to that. And if they're giving Zegras $3 or $4 million to try and sign him, what are they giving Jamie Drysdale? I mean, if they're giving Zegras $3 or $4 million, I was thinking they'd be giving Drysdale somewhere between $2 and $3 million, and Drysdale's a lot better than that as well. So in my eyes, I think the Ducks are really hurting their players right now by having long, strenuous contracts. And like I said, giving them what they want is probably not the best. And if they're asking for like $7-8 million, then definitely try and negotiate something with them. But they're not worth $3 to $4 million. And I think if they continue to try and offer them this low, especially when they were already in training camp and they should be playing with their teams, especially Zegras, given he's the face of the franchise, Drysdale's probably their best defenseman at this point in time. I think those two need to be in training camp. I think those two need to be in the NHL. Given the Ducks cap situation, they should easily be able to sign these two guys, and they have not been signed yet. There are 2 of the last 4 RFAs, and Bernie, I don't know what's taking so long in Columbus, and Pinto's only not signed because the Senators just don't have the cap space to sign him. So, given that fact, I am quite surprised Zegras and Drysdale are currently not signed, but on top of that, in that article that Renaud Lavoie said that Zegras was only being offered $3 or $4 million, he says that the Buffalo Sabres are sniffing around, seeing if they could possibly, and I mean possibly, nab Zegras from Anaheim and possibly make a trade with them. Now, I think Buffalo would definitely have the assets to pull off a trade to get Zegras. He's a really, really good player. He's a very fantastic young player, but do they really need offense? I think he'll be a fantastic player. Add Zegras to that top 6 in Buffalo, and you have a lethal top 6. But the problem last year wasn't really scoring. They were a top 3 team in scoring last year. They scored at a really high rate. Their problem last year was defense. I think they might be better trying to get some of their cap space to get a goaltender or a defenseman, whether it's right now or closer to the trade line, instead of getting Zegras. But if they were to get Zegras, I mean, look at what the top 6 could look like. I mean, you already have Tuch, Thompson, Skinner, Cozens, you have Peterka, you have Quinn, you have Middlestat, you have Olofsson, you have Kulich on his way, you have Rosen on his way, you have Savoy on his way, you have Benson on his way. You add Zegras in that's an extremely young and talented forward group. But they would have to make a pretty big offer, in my opinion, to do a trade. I'll probably have to say there would have to be like a top 5 protected first-round pick. They'd have to probably include extremely good young talent like either Isaac Rosen or Noah Ostlund. They'd probably have to include a guy like Henri Jokiharju, in my opinion. They'd probably have to get an NHL contract, like maybe a Victor Olofsson, and then maybe even another pick or a prospect, like maybe another B-level prospect or a second-round pick or something like that. But that would probably have to be the basis of some sort of a package, like a top-end prospect like Rosen or Ostlund, a first-round pick, a top young defender in Jokiharju, a contract in Olofsson, and probably another pick. And the Sabres really want to give that up for a young forward in which they already have a ton of. Not exactly sure that would be the best. So I could see the Sabres have interest in Zegras. I could see them have the assets to pull off a Zegras trade. But in my eyes, they could use their cap space a little bit elsewhere. And either right now or closer to the trade deadline, I think they could go after a defenseman or a goaltender to improve their back end instead of their front end. So going to be interesting to see, but it sounds like Zegras is being really lowballed right now, and it sounds like the Sabres could have some interest in bringing him in. But at this point in time, I don't see the Sabres really being that much into trying to bring in Zegras. But there could be some other teams, and Zegras' situation is going to be something we have to watch out for over the next little while. And lastly here, going over to Steven Stamkos. Now, Stamkos went to the media, once again, doing some interviews like usual, and Stamkos said that he's disappointed right now in the lack of contract negotiations that the Bolts and him have had about a new contract extension. Stamkos is entering the final year of his deal. As I've talked about before on this YouTube channel, on my hockey blog, I've said that signing their captain to a new extension is going to be one of their biggest things that they need to get done this offseason. And it sounds like at this point in time, they have not had too many conversations on a new contract. And then GM Brisebois also was talking to the media, and he said that at this point in time, he needs to get more information on a Stamkos contract. And Stamkos said he'd be willing to talk contract in season. He really wants to get this done. He wants to remain a Tampa Bay Lightning, but it sounded like Brisebois said that he's going to wait until the end of the season, probably not going to have any contract negotiations in season, and that he's going to see how the season plays out. He said that they need to save cap dollars. He definitely said that there's a lot of different things that the Bolts need to watch out for, and that they're not at this point in time looking to sign Stamkos, and they're probably going to have to wait and see approach, which I don't think would make Stamkos very happy. Now, Elliot Friedman talked about this on his recent 32 Thoughts podcast. He said that it sounds like we're going to be going into the upcoming season sort of like we were during Stamkos' last contract negotiations. Stamkos signed an 8-year deal with an $8.5 million AAV. I think it was back in 2016. And that was during the day when a lot of people thought that Stamkos was going to go to free agency. Apparently, there was some interest from teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs and Buffalo Sabres back then. But he did wind up signing with the Tampa Bay Lightning on the day that Taylor Hall and PK Subban were also traded at that point in time. But it sounded like that was the exact same deal that Stevie Eisenman was asking for a couple of months before that deal wound up happening. So it sounds like a lot of people thought that he took a discount at that point in time, signing for $8.5 million when he probably could have gone closer to $9.5 million on the open market. But he remained with the Tampa Bay Lightning. But another interesting point Elliotte Friedman brought up was that in the past couple of years, the Bolts have signed a lot of their key free agents to long-term mega extensions a year before their contracts were up. Now, that's Hagel, who signed a new 8-year contract this offseason. That's Chernak, Sergachev, and Cirelli, who signed one last offseason. I think the year before, Point signed a long-term contract extension. I think Kucherov and Vasilevsky were not too far behind that either. He says all these guys, 1 year before free agency, their contracts were. I remember last year's offseason, on free agency day, when you could officially sign players to extensions, Chernak, Sergachev, and Cirelli were all immediately signed to long-term extensions. So, given all that fact, I think it's quite surprising that they're signing all of these guys a year before they have their contracts up, and Stamkos still doesn't have his contract and new contract extension in place. Now, Stamkos is a tiny bit older than that, but it definitely sounds like, even though he is a little bit older, he probably wants to play another 5 years in Tampa to play around a 20-year career in Tampa Bay. It sounds like that's what would be his preference, so he probably wants to sign somewhere between 3 and 5 years right now for the Tampa Bay Lightning to remain with Tampa. It sounds like he does really want to remain with Tampa, but if I can't see why the Tampa Bay Lightning would not want to try at this point in time to re-sign him. It sort of sounds like they're really strapped for cap, and he would have to take a pretty big discount at that point in time. I mean, if you look at their cap situation, they have $12 million in cap space right now. Stamkos, you could arguably say at this point, is probably due for a little bit of a raise. Could probably be worth $9.5 million next year. So at that point in time, the Lightning would only have about $3.5 million left in cap space. And would they really want to do that given all the holes on that team right now? They have a couple of depth defensemen contracts coming up. They have a couple of depth forwards coming up. They already have a weaker, not as deep team right now. So if Stamkos is taking up that much money, I could possibly see why they would be a little bit wary to sign him to an extension right now. But he's their captain. He's a very versatile forward. He's a former first-round pick. He's put up fantastic numbers these past 2 years after suffering an injury. In my eyes, he's a fantastic player, so they should really be trying to sign him instead of waiting until after the season. In my eyes, I think unless, at this current point in time with the current cap situation, unless Stamkos is willing to sign for $7.5 million, I could see the Tampa Bay Lightning possibly be looking to move on from him. It also sounds, according to Freeman, like the Tampa Bay Lightning wouldn't be overly crushed if Stamkos were to leave via free agency this upcoming offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see. On that 32 Thoughts podcast that Elliotte Friedman did recently, Jeff Merrick also mentioned a possible team who could be interested might be the Florida Panthers if that winds up happening and does go to free agency. They have a lot of cap space for next year. The cap is going to go up $4 to $5 million, and they have a lot of contracts coming off their books, such as Sam Reinhart, Brandon Montour, Gustav Forsling, some big name free agents who are going to be coming off their books. They would have the cap space to sign Stamkos, and they would have the same incentives that the Tampa Bay Lightning could offer Stamkos, given they're both playing in the Florida state. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Florida could definitely have some interest. I would be really interested to see if there's any other teams who have interest. Definitely, it's going to be interesting to see. I still would be surprised if Stamkos goes elsewhere. I still think he really wants to be with Tampa, and I still think they will eventually get a contract extension done. But at this point in time, it sounds like the Bolts really do want Stamkos to get maybe possibly a sort of a discount, maybe sign him for maybe closer to $7-8 million instead of $9 million. And if that's the case, if Stamkos really wants what he's worth, he may have to go to market to get it. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it's just a really interesting situation there in Tampa. And with their tight cap situation, they may not be wanting to sign Stamkos right now to a $9 million contract extension. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments on all that was discussed today. What do you think of the signings and the PTO updates? Do you think Fleury winds up playing another season beyond this year, or does he go and retire after this year? Do Hellebuyck and Scheifele remain with the Jets, or do they wind up getting traded at the trade line? How do you think the Jets will do this year? Do you think they'll do all right? They'll make a playoff spot, make a playoff run, and keep Hellebuyck and Scheifele? Or do you think they'll have a more mediocre season, hovering around the playoffs, maybe just make it in and lose in the first round, and possibly lose Hellebuyck and Scheifele in free agency, or possibly move them to the trade line? Definitely love to hear your thoughts on that. Do the Buffalo Sabres have some serious interest in Trevor Zegras? I think they could have some interest, but I don't think it's probably the best move for them to acquire Zegras, so going to be interesting to see that. But I do think it's really, really difficult for the Ducks right now, lowballing Zegras at around $3-4 million. And I think unless they up their asking price, Zegras is never going to sign somewhere that low. And do you think Stamkos could possibly go to free agency next year? I think at this point in time, I still think it's probably likely he signs with the Bolts, but I think it's a lot more of a possibility than I would have thought at all this offseason. And it's going to be interesting to see. That's going to be an extremely important situation to watch out for over the next little while. That's going to be interesting to see as well. But definitely, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If Stamkos would go to free agency, what teams do you think would be possible he could go to? And what sort of a contract do you think he would sign? Definitely love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. But that's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.